The night air bit against Emma Carter's skin as contractions ripped through her body. She clutched the railing of the porch, her suitcase sprawled open on the steps, spilling baby clothes into the dirt. Behind her, the door slammed with a finality that shook the frame. Neighbors' curtains twitched, but no one came. Inside, Gavin Blake straightened his tie, already shaping his narrative. Outside, Emma's breath fogged in the cold, a woman in labor with no hand to hold, no partner to lean on. The cruelest moment of her life unfolded not in secret, but in plain view of a world that chose silence. Betrayed, abandoned, stripped of dignity, her pain was more than physical. It was the kind of wound only poverty and betrayal carve into the bone, a reminder that in America, a poor woman's cries are too often treated as noise. The chandeliers blazed above a ballroom dressed in excess. Silk gowns swept marble floors. Champagne flutes clinked under the hum of cameras. At the center of it all, Gavin smiled like a king, tuxedo crisp, hand resting possessively on his new wife's waist. He looked untouchable, a man adored by the city's elite. Then the music faltered. Heads turned toward the staircase. Descending slowly, gown shimmering black as midnight, came Emma Carter, no longer bent, no longer broken. Her eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on the man who had once slammed a door in her face. The crowd gasped, whispers rippled, cameras snapped faster. Narration cut through the glittering noise. The same woman he had cast into the cold was here to strip away his crown. The storm had walked into silk, and the night's laughter would turn to shame.
Fluorescent lights glared as Emma staggered through the ER doors, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the counter for support. Nurses rushed her onto a stretcher, eyes wide at the sight of a laboring woman alone. Across town, Gavin was not pacing halls or filling out paperwork. He sat at a bar with his mistress, phone in hand, typing a post that painted him as a concerned husband suffering through his wife's instability. While Emma bore down against the crushing waves of pain, Gavin bore down a keyboard, crafting lies for an audience ready to believe. The disparity between truth and perception split wide, a woman screaming alone in a hospital bed, while the world read a husband's carefully polished fiction. The cruelty wasn't just in abandonment, it was in how easily lies spread, burying her suffering beneath polished words. In the narrow delivery room, Emma's cries collided with the mechanical beat of monitors. Nurse Alana Reed whispered encouragement, guiding her through each contraction. Sweat streaked Emma's face, her nails dug into the rails, her strength fueled only by the need to bring life into a hostile world. Hours passed until a piercing cry filled the room, a baby's cry, fierce and defiant. Emma collapsed back, tears falling as Grace Carter was placed against her chest. For one fleeting moment, warmth and life erased the night's cruelty. Across town, Gavin poured champagne into Crystal, Sienna Hart laughing at his side. Their toast rose beneath a chandelier, while Emma whispered promises to her newborn under fluorescent light. One scene was glamour, the other, survival. Yet only one carried truth. The contrast was brutal, the kind America applauds in one room and ignores in another.
When the door opened again, Emma expected another nurse. Instead, her mother, Patricia Carter, walked in, perfume thick and eyes sharper than concern. She sat stiff in a chair, voice clipped, warning Emma that Gavin had called, worried about her episodes. Even as Emma's newborn rested nearby, Patricia's words cut deeper than the contractions ever had. Stability mattered more than love, she claimed, and Gavin offered stability. Emma, she implied, offered only chaos. No comfort came, only judgment wrapped in polite tones. For a daughter desperate for a trace of tenderness. There was none. Betrayal burned deeper when it wore the face of family. In that moment, Emma realized she was truly alone. The woman who should have been her refuge had chosen status, siding with the man who left her bleeding in the night. The apartment's walls wept with damp as Emma rocked Grace against her chest. The crib she dreamed of was replaced with a second-hand stroller beside the bed. The night was cold, and the only blanket was too thin for both mother and child. Hunger gnawed at Emma, her stomach hollow from skipping meals, but she ignored it. Every ounce of strength, every scrap of warmth, she gave to her daughter. The city outside pulsed with neon and laughter, unaware of the woman clutching her infant in silence. Poverty was not a temporary guest, it was an unwanted tenant pressing in on every breath. Emma whispered promises into the dark, but the truth was harsh. Tomorrow, she would wake with nothing but desperation. No food, no safety net, only a fragile hope that love could shield her daughter from despair.
Grease hissed in the kitchen as Emma balanced plates heavy with burgers and fries, her feet aching in worn shoes. At a corner booth sat two women she once knew from her old neighborhood, their whispers cut sharper than knives. "That's Gavin's crazy ex," one murmured. "Pathetic," the other replied. Emma's face flushed, but she forced a smile, placing plates in front of them with steady hands. The laughter stung more than the heat of the kitchen. She carried their food as they feasted on her shame, sipping coffee she couldn't afford for herself. In the theater of class, she had been cast as spectacle. The women dined on judgment while she scraped tips to buy formula. Each whispered word reinforced the gulf between rich gossip and poor reality, a gulf that trapped Emma in silent humiliation every night. At dawn, Emma's body ached as she scrubbed the marble floors of a mansion that smelled of polish and excess. A woman in pearls stood on a phone, her voice carrying across the pristine kitchen. She spoke of Gavin, praising his remarriage, mocking Emma as unstable and dramatic. Emma bent lower, mop steady, swallowing the humiliation like a stone. The irony pressed against her chest. She cleaned the homes of women who upheld her husband's lies. Every stroke of the mop was a reminder that poverty erases a voice faster than any slander. No defense could compete with wealth's megaphone. The rich woman's laughter echoed through the empty halls, while Emma's silence filled the cracks between tiles. Even in service, she was invisible, her story rewritten by those with status and polished floors under their feet.
Late at night, Emma sat on her mattress, Grace asleep beside her. She pulled out a wooden chest, the last remnant of her father. Inside were neatly folded letters, his handwriting steady, his words carrying the warmth she no longer found in the living. Beneath them lay trust documents, her father's final act of protection, $20 million locked away, safeguarded from greedy hands. She traced the numbers, her heart caught between disbelief and fire. The world thought she was penniless, mocked her as a burden. Yet here was power, buried in ink and law. The papers whispered of possibility, but also of risk. She could wield them to survive or to strike back. In that small room, poverty pressed hard, but hope stirred. Her father's foresight had given her a weapon. The question was whether she had the strength to use it. Morning light filtered through cracked blinds as Emma dialed Daniel Hawthorne, her father's old attorney. In his office, he explained what the papers meant. The inheritance was untouchable, her lifeline. But there was more. Gavin's company faced a shareholder vote in 10 days. A poison pill strategy loomed that could secure Gavin's grip forever, unless someone acted first. The inheritance wasn't just wealth, it was leverage. For the first time since the porch, Emma felt a flicker of control. The clock ticked in her ears, 10 days to build power, 10 days to turn betrayal into reckoning. In a world that chewed women like her and spat them out, 10 days was nothing. But with a baby on her hip and her father's name on those papers, Emma made a silent vow. This time, she would not be silent.
Hawthorne guided Emma through neighborhoods not of marble, but of modest homes and retirement departments. Together, they met small shareholders, former employees, delivery drivers, janitors, people holding scraps of stock from company benefits. Each signature Emma gathered was more than ink. It was a quiet rebellion. These were the very people Gavin had underpaid, the ones his empire had crushed beneath polished shoes. Yet in their hands lay fragments of power, fragments Emma stitched together piece by piece. Some signed with trembling hands, some with fierce smiles, each proxy card a spark against the darkness. The invisible hands of labor were uniting, and they were uniting behind a woman cast aside. Emma's army would not wear suits or pearls. Her army wore uniforms, name tags, and calloused hands. Emma pored over documents late at night, her lamp casting shadows over the cluttered table. In one folder, she found memos denying maternity leave to female employees. In another, glossy brochures of Gavin's maternal health gala, boasting of commitment to women's wellness. The hypocrisy was nauseating. He was celebrated for funding charity events while stripping his own workers of dignity. Emma underlined the dates, highlighted the contradictions, and built a file strong enough to pierce the polished facade. Each document was a weapon, not just against Gavin, but against the narrative that wealth equaled morality. The truth was crueler. The rich could deny women their rights, then collect applause for writing checks at galas. Emma whispered to herself as she worked, not of vengeance alone, but of justice. The lies would be exposed under the same lights that once protected him.
In her suburban home, Patricia Carter signed paperwork slid across the table by Gavin's fixer. In exchange for help with her mounting HOA dues, she agreed to testify to her daughter's instability. It was dressed as pragmatism, one signature, one problem solved. But beneath the neat pen strokes was betrayal. Emma would later see the bank transfers, each one proof that her own mother had sold her dignity for manicured lawns and neighborhood gossip. Patricia told herself she was choosing stability, that appearances mattered more than messy truths. Yet what she truly chose was comfort over conscience. The cruelty of class wasn't only in wealth's grip, it was in how easily poverty's scraps could be weaponized to break the already broken. When mothers trade daughters for social standing, the wound bleeds longer than any labor pain. The clock glowed past 2 as Emma sat at her kitchen table, Grace asleep in the stroller beside her. Papers lay scattered, trust documents, proxy cards, loan agreements. A lender had just withdrawn, leaving her short of the capital she needed. Tears blurred her vision as she stared at the numbers. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound as despair crept close. For a moment it seemed over. 10 days felt like 10 seconds, and she had nothing left to bargain with. She buried her face in her hands, the weight of every humiliation pressing in. The narrative sharpened. The world never waits for a poor woman to catch her breath. Yet even here, at her lowest, something inside Emma refused to die. She looked at Grace, breathing softly, and promised herself she would find a way.
The baby's cry cut through the silence, sharp and demanding. Emma scooped Grace into her arms, rocking gently, whispering words not of comfort, but of conviction. Every coo, every soft breath was a reminder of why surrender was not an option. Poverty demanded despair, but motherhood demanded resilience. Narration cut deep. This child, fragile yet fierce, was not just Emma's daughter. She was Emma's anchor, the weight that kept her steady against the storm. While Gavin wrapped himself in chandeliers and lies, Emma wrapped herself in a blanket barely thick enough for two. Yet in that thin fabric, there was a warmth money could not counterfeit. Each bottle she prepared, each diaper she changed, became part of her arsenal. Grace was not a burden. She was the reason Emma would rise. Her fight was no longer survival, it was legacy. Morning broke with footsteps in a Union Hall basement. Custodians, receptionists, and delivery drivers, faces Gavin never remembered, met Emma with proxy cards in hand. One by one, they signed, their calloused hands gripping pens with purpose. They remembered the long hours, the denied benefits, the arrogance of a man who never saw them as more than numbers. Now their numbers mattered. When the final signature tipped Emma past 18%, she felt power shift for the first time. Narrator's voice cut sharp. The invisible hands of labor had turned the tide. While Gavin relied on champagne toasts and social circles, Emma relied on the forgotten, the ones who cleaned offices and emptied trash cans. For once, their voices carried weight. Emma left that hall not with money, but with something stronger: solidarity. The poor had begun to rewrite the story.
Gavin stormed into his boardroom, eyes blazing. He announced sweeping layoffs, blamed external markets, and painted Emma as a bitter, unstable ex-wife plotting to ruin him. His words were delivered with the confidence of wealth, each lie designed to crush her credibility. The press ate it up. Headlines echoed his narrative: the self-made CEO under attack by a jealous ex. While Emma scrubbed floors at dawn, Gavin strutted across magazine covers, hailed as resilient and misunderstood. Narration cut cruelly. In America, the poor must bleed proof, while the rich need only posture. His poison pill strategy loomed, threatening to lock out Emma's influence forever. He laughed with Sienna over oysters that night, convinced his story would win. But arrogance blinds the powerful. He didn't see the cracks forming beneath his empire's marble floors, cracks carved by those he thought disposable. Sienna Hart adjusted diamond earrings as she entered their glass-walled penthouse. She found Gavin leaning too close to a female donor, his hand brushing her arm. Her smile cracked. Fear pricked her chest, not jealousy, but terror of slipping down the ladder she had climbed so hard to reach. She wasn't born into wealth. She clawed her way into it, one rebrand, one polished facade at a time. To lose Gavin meant losing the illusion of belonging. Narration cut through. Her betrayal of Emma was born not of cruelty alone, but of fear of falling back into the class she had fled. In the mirror that night, Sienna didn't see a villain. She saw a woman on borrowed time. Gavin's infidelity was a crack she couldn't plaster. For the first time, she wondered if Emma had been telling the truth all along.
Inside the corporate tower, Gavin's fury boiled. Partners hesitated, suppliers delayed, and the board whispered behind closed doors. His assistant trembled under his wrath, fumbling through papers that told the same story: decline. Outside, Emma rode the bus home, clutching Grace against her chest, Proxy cards in her bag. The contrast was sharp. A man unraveling in glass offices versus a woman rebuilding in cramped apartments. Narration deepened. Wealth shields arrogance until reality pierces through. Gavin shouted about loyalty and strength, while Emma counted signatures and pennies. Yet each passing day, the balance shifted. The pressure was no longer hers alone. It seeped into his empire, eroding the foundation he thought untouchable. The city that once praised him began to murmur. A storm was gathering, and for once, Gavin wasn't the one directing its path. In a dim hotel bar, Sienna leaned across a table toward one of Gavin's rivals. She slid an envelope across the polished wood, her hands steady despite the quake in her chest. Inside were supplier fraud emails, proof of Gavin's hidden rot. The rival's eyebrows lifted, impressed. Sienna sipped her martini, masking her desperation with poise. Narration struck. Betrayal came not from loyalty to justice, but loyalty to herself. She wasn't saving Emma, she was saving her own standing in a world that discards women who fall from wealth. Her fear had become a weapon, and Gavin's secrets became her bargaining chips. In that moment, the empire's cracks widened, not from Emma's hand alone, but from the hollow loyalty of those closest to him. The mistress he trusted most was chiseling away at the marble facade.
Emma spread proxy cards across her kitchen table. The papers fanned out like a soldier's map. Each one represented hours of pleading, convincing, and hope. The final tally tipped her over 22%, control range. She exhaled, exhaustion giving way to fire. Narrator's voice steadied. The janitors, the receptionists, the forgotten had carried her into the room where power lived. She hadn't bought her way in with chandeliers or champagne. She had walked in carrying signatures inked by working-class hands. Across town, Gavin downed another glass of whiskey, convinced he was untouchable. He didn't know the poor had already stormed his gates. Emma tucked Grace's blanket tighter that night and allowed herself a rare smile. For the first time since the porch, the future no longer felt like despair. It felt like possibility, sharpened, ready, waiting to strike. Inside a packed courtroom, Hawthorne's voice rang steady, challenging Gavin's poison pill maneuver. Gavin sat at the defense table, smug and dismissive, convinced his wealth would buy silence. But the judge's gavel struck hard. The strategy was unlawful self-dealing. The shareholder vote would proceed as scheduled. Gasps echoed. Gavin's face flushed crimson. Outside, Emma stood with Grace's stroller, her head bowed in exhaustion, but her eyes bright with determination. Narration cut through. For once, the law bent toward the powerless, not the polished. This was not victory, but it was survival, an opening in a wall that had been sealed for too long. 10 days of suffering, humiliation, and hunger had led here. She had clawed through despair and found a foothold. The vote was set for gala night, the very stage Gavin thought would celebrate his dominance.
The ballroom glittered under chandeliers that scattered gold across marble floors polished to perfection. Waiters in black vests floated between guests, balancing crystal flutes. The city's elite clustered in sequined gowns and tailored tuxedos, their laughter loud enough to drown out doubt. At the center stood Gavin Blake, tuxedo crisp, smile sharp, hand resting on Sienna Hart's jeweled wrist. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, every lens capturing the image of triumph. But beneath the polished smile, Gavin's hand trembled slightly against the glass. Narration cut across the glamour. Tonight's performance was more than a party. It was his last desperate bid to convince the city that he was untouchable. What he did not know was that another performance had been scripted, one not in his control. The storm he had cast into the night was walking toward his spotlight. The music softened as heads turned toward the staircase. Emma descended in a simple black gown that glimmered with each step. Her eyes held no apology, only resolve. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras snapped with renewed hunger, their lenses swiveling from Gavin to her. She moved to the center, her presence undeniable, her silence louder than any speech. Then she spoke, the announcement that she held controlling interest in Gavin's company. The room froze, whispers erupted, disbelief mingling with shock. Gavin's face drained of color, his polished facade cracking. Narration carved through the silence. The man who believed her powerless now stood before the woman who owned his crown. It wasn't wealth's usual story of inheritance and privilege. It was survival transmuted into power, written not with champagne but with proxy cards carried by invisible hands.
Screens lit up across the ballroom. Memos appeared, one after another. Denied maternity leave requests, layoffs timed with pregnancy announcements, and benefit denials to working mothers. Juxtaposed alongside were glossy photographs of Gavin's maternal health gala, his name emblazoned as champion for women. The hypocrisy was naked, undeniable under crystal light. The crowd shifted uneasily,
murmurs thickening into outrage. Narration drove it home. He had built his empire on women's pain while selling himself as their savior. The chandeliers no longer gleamed for him, they burned against his lies. Even those who once clapped at his speeches lowered their eyes, ashamed to be caught in his orbit. Gavin's mouth opened, but no words could bridge the gulf between the man he claimed to be and the truth laid bare for all to see. His empire's foundation cracked, its glitter turned to glass shards. The next slide was sharper, crueler. Emails in Gavin's own words plotting to trap Emma's inheritance, mocking her as weak. Then Sienna's leaks appeared, supplier fraud, embezzled funds, whispered promises to rivals. Finally, Patricia's betrayal, bank transfers from Gavin's fixer, each one labeled, each one proof she had sold her daughter for HOA dues and suburban comfort. Gasps rattled the hall. Sienna's face drained as whispers called her a snake. Patricia shrank near the back, her reputation crumbling. Narration cut deep. Betrayal does not come from strangers, but from those closest, the hands that should have lifted, instead choosing to push. Under the chandeliers, the rot was undeniable. Gavin's allies melted away, their silence louder than condemnation. The man who stood untouchable was suddenly naked, surrounded not by applause but by shame thick enough to choke.
Board Chair Evelyn Torres stepped forward, her presence commanding. The ballots were cast, proxies tallied, hands raised. Silence hung heavy as the outcome was announced. Gavin Blake removed as CEO, effective immediately. The words cracked across the ballroom like thunder. Cameras erupted in flashes, reporters shouted, the crowd surged with murmurs of disbelief and awe. Gavin staggered, his glass slipping, shattering on marble like his empire's fall. Narration pressed. The man who once slammed a door in his wife's face was now shut out of his own company. It wasn't charity, it wasn't chance, it was justice, delivered not in courtrooms, but in the heart of his glittering kingdom. Emma stood calm amid the storm, the embodiment of survival turned strength, her silence cutting sharper than his loudest boasts. The crown had been lifted, not by wealth's blessing, but by resilience's hand. The fallout unfolded like a slow-motion collapse. Sienna slipped toward the door, whispers trailing her. Traitor, snake, ruined. Her diamonds sparkled no longer, they weighed heavy against her skin. Patricia attempted to approach Emma, reaching through the crowd, but faces turned cold, eyes narrowed. Once her allies in suburban prestige, they pulled back as if her betrayal were a contagion. Gavin dropped to his knees in the center of the marble floor, his polished shoes slipping on shattered glass. He begged, hands shaking, voice breaking, but Emma walked past without pause. Narration sharpened. Poverty had taught her silence when mocked, but power had taught her silence when begged. His unraveling was public, humiliating, permanent. The empire he thought eternal crumbled in front of the very people who once praised him. He was no longer a king, just a spectacle.
Days later, in the company boardroom, Emma laid out conditions for her control. Not vengeance alone, but policy. Paid leave for mothers, childcare stipends for working parents, a living wage floor for staff. The executives shifted, stunned by the audacity. Her revenge was not a personal crown. It was a collective shield. The same workers who had signed proxy cards at kitchen tables now held benefits carved from marble boardrooms. Emma's power became more than survival. It became reform. Where Gavin sought only to preserve his image, she sought to repair what had been broken. This was not the vindictive fury of a scorned woman. It was the steady fire of justice, forged in nights of hunger and humiliation. She had risen, and she carried the poor with her. For once, the system bent toward those it had crushed. The final image was not chandeliers or marble floors, but dawn filtering into a modest kitchen. Emma stood at the counter, packing Grace's diaper bag. Beside it lay Proxy cards, neatly stacked, and a flyer announcing new childcare benefits at Bennett Global. Grace gurgled softly in her high chair, her small hand reaching for her mother's sleeve. Narration whispered, "She did not rise because she destroyed him. She rose because she rebuilt herself. The empire she seized was not a trophy, but a tool. Poverty had pressed her into despair. Betrayal had cut her to the bone, but neither had broken her." In the quiet hum of a small kitchen, with sunlight warming cracked tiles, Emma Carter stood victorious. Her child's breath filled the room, steady and certain. And for the first time, Emma's dawn was not desperate. It was free.